Hello everyone, and welcome to December 2nd, and happy Advent. So we find ourselves on Wednesday in the first week of the Advent season, and I hope that you have been able to find some extra time for prayer and reflection on the themes of the Advent season: hope and possibility and quiet waiting for Christ. Today is a special anniversary in the life of the church. Today we remember the 40th anniversary of the martyrdom of 4 American churchwomen who died because of their work with the poor in El Salvador. Some of you might be familiar with this story, but for those of you who are not, I'll just share that briefly. So many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Saint Oscar Romero. He was the bishop in El Salvador during the 70s and beginning of 1980. And he was martyred in March of 1980 for speaking out against the violence against the poor and others in the country. There was a civil war during the 70s and 80s in El Salvador, and those that were harmed the greatest were the poor. They were victims of severe poverty, violence, loss of land, loss of homes, and the loss of their livelihoods. Bishop Romero spoke out against that violence, and because of that, he lost his life. During his time as bishop, he put out a call for missionaries to come and work and live among the poor in El Salvador. And the 4 women that we remember today answered that call. And those 4 women are Sister Maura Clarke, a Maryknoll sister; Jean Donovan, a lay missionary; Sister Ida Ford, a Maryknoll sister; and Sister Dorothy Kazel, an Ursuline sister. These are the 4 women that we remember today. On the evening of December 2nd in 1980, they were abducted, raped, and brutally murdered while returning from the airport in San Salvador in El Salvador. Each of the church women had made a choice to remain in El Salvador, despite the growing violence towards the poor and the church. Their murders were part of a growing number of violent attacks against the Catholic Church because the church spoke out on behalf of the poor and the marginalized. During the 12 years following their deaths, over 75,000 innocent civilians were killed in El Salvador as the result of the civil war there. And sadly, we know now that much of that violence was fueled by money supplied by our own U.S. government. 3 of the 5 military personnel that carried out the murder of these women received training at a U.S. military training school, then known as the U.S. Army School of the Americas. For years, members of our youth ministry program traveled to Georgia to take part in the protests against the violence perpetrated by the graduates of that school. The story of these women has long been a part of my own faith journey, from grade school and high school and college, through adulthood and to this moment. They have served as a critical reminder for me of what being a disciple of Jesus might cost us. When these 4 women first felt that desire to serve the poor, none of them thought of being murdered. They simply were responding to a call within them to stand with those who were most forgotten. As the situation grew more dangerous, They often thought of leaving El Salvador for their own safety, but the call to stay and walk with the poor was stronger than the idea of leaving there. Sister Ida Ford wrote this: "Am I willing to suffer with the people here, the suffering of the powerless? Can I say to my neighbors, I have no solutions to this situation. I don't know the answers, but I promise I will walk with you, search with you, and be with you? Can I let myself be evangelized by this opportunity? Can I look and accept my own poorness as I learn from these poor ones?" And one of the other women, Jean Donovan, said, "Several times in my mind I have decided to leave El Salvador. I almost could, except for the children, the poor, bruised victims of this insanity. Who would care for them? Whose heart would be so staunch as to favor the reasonable thing in a sea of their tears and helplessness? Not mine, dear friend, not mine." The gospel reading from today shows Jesus responding to the needs of the crowd, curing the blind, curing those who couldn't walk, and finally, wanting to feed the crowd. And he asks the disciples to please feed them, and they respond. Where could we ever get enough bread to satisfy such a crowd? Jesus is undaunted by this response, and he makes what seems impossible possible. And all who are there are fed, and there's baskets of food left over. For me, the message of this gospel passage, the message of the lives of the 4 churchwomen, and the message of Advent are all one and the same. In the scripture passage, Jesus comes and says, "No, we will not let this crowd go hungry," and he gives enough food to all. He comes in and offers himself. For the churchwomen, in the midst of such violence and suffering, Jesus comes in and says, "No, the example of their lives will not end in their deaths. And all these 40 years since then, the witness of these women has inspired countless of people to work for justice for all people." And for the season of Advent, a word that literally means to come, we spend these weeks preparing our hearts in trusting in the promise of Christmas, where Jesus, in fact, does come and is born into our world to be with us and to be one of us. Jesus comes, and especially during these difficult times, Jesus comes to give us hope and to keep us moving forward. I'd like to end with a quote by Sister Ida Ford, and it's part of a letter that she wrote to her niece just months before she was murdered. "I hope you come to find that which gives life a deep meaning for you, something worth living for, maybe even worth dying for, something that energizes you, enthuses you, and enables you to keep moving ahead. I can't tell you what that is. That's for you to find, to choose, and to love. I can just encourage you to start looking and support you in the search." Across the world today, there will be communities all over who are remembering the lives of Maura, Ida, Dorothy, and Jean. We stand with all of these people in lifting up the courage and commitment of these women. I hope that our prayer today is that their legacy can continue to inspire people across the world to be in solidarity with those who need us the most, to be willing to stand up against injustice, and to trust in Jesus' promise to come and be with us. Blessings for this Advent season, and wishing you much hope.